Before I start, I did want to recognize that we have Wendy Lagaretta, who is one of our board members of HPCSN, sitting in the audience. Thanks, Wendy, for coming. Okay, so this is basically an analysis, HPCSN doing and analyzing some of the data that we pulled from StriveHI reports and other things. And basically, we title this, or subtitle this, Artifacts of a Changing System. So we start with good news. All of you know that we have Biola PCS as a recognition school. What I did was did a comparison between Biola and the next door school. There's one thing that's different, and that's, or one thing that to be highlighted is that Biola is the only middle school that made recognition status. So other than primary school that made recognition status. And if we look at these numbers, you'll see the proficiency. There's like almost a 30% gap between Biola and the school next door. What I thought was, and that's in growth, the growth differences as well. But what I wanted to just use this slide for is just also point out something that's pretty remarkable. The non-high needs proficiency and the high needs proficiency, they're the two last rows in the spreadsheet, is the non-high needs is actually 5% lower than the high needs proficiency, which is the gap that StriveHI tries to close and measure. And so I thought that was pretty remarkable that they were able to do that. They have 85% free and reduced lunch for this year that was tested. Some other things that we could do apples to apples comparisons on, being now that StriveHI gives us more indicators, it's actually definitely moving in the right direction from NCOB in the way that you can take a look at some of the other things that are that's going well for charter schools. So 11th graders scoring above 19, the statewide average was 34%. WEA was ranked first with 75%. ULS, or University Lab School, was 69%, and MBTA came in at 65%. This is apples to apples student populations. Graduation rate, statewide average 82, and you know that Doug covered some of this. We have Kanuokaina and Kamakau. First, fourth is UH Lab, MBTA is 94th. I'm sorry, 6th, with 94%. College going, we have statewide average 63%, and Kawaikini and Hakipu'u has 100% in first place. Second ranking was University Lab with 90%, and MBTA at 77%. And then I kind of just added this in from another report, which is the P20 CCRI reports that does like college and career readiness. And Hakipu'u, they're located on the Windward campus. They have 83% of their completers at their school graduate with college credits. Connections has 74% that graduate with college credits. And Kihei is 51% of their completers that graduate from, that earn college credits while they're in high school. The statewide average is a statewide program. And I'm not sure if not every school will participate in it, but the statewide average has been about 5%. Some of the possible high school rankings, I pulled this out because I thought, if StriveHI compares or attributes all schools that have K through 12 as a high school, I thought I'd put some of these things in here because there might be some consistency with their population, their whole K through 12 population as well as their high school, and I didn't quite explain that well. But possible high school rankings, percentage of students proficient in math. If I did a high school comparison, Kihei would be 3rd, HTA would be 5th, and MBTA would be 7th.
What was 1 and 2?
I have it in my records, but I was charter school focused, sorry. Reading, MBTA, Kihei 2nd. Oh, so reading looked really good. MBTA 1st, Kihei 2nd, UH Lab 3rd. And science, MBTA came in 1st, Kihei 2nd, HTA 4th, and Kanuokaina 5th. Here's some additional highlights. Because StriveHI has multiple measures and indicators, we were able to do a little bit more analysis and go into complex areas. Kawakini and Kanuikapono had the highest SGP in reading of all Kauai schools, 67% and 63% respectively. Kawakini and Kanaka are ranked 3rd and 4th for highest SGP in math of all Kauai schools at 60% and 56%. Kamaile, even though they're automatically triggered because they are a SIG school, Kamaile has the highest growth in reading in the Leeward complex at 66% and the 3rd highest in math at 66%. Go Kamaile. Kalaihona has the highest reading proficiency in the Leeward complex at 68%. And then I just put in here, I should have broke this out a little bit and said, Haas was on the priority list because of a trigger. But when you compare it to some of the high schools around there, you are looking at proficiency levels that are higher in comparison to the other schools. I was unable to do more comparisons because the school data isn't broken down by school levels, so elementary and middle school and high school, and many of our schools are K-12. The bad news for Biola PCS, they're a great school, but some of the bad things that have forced basically the situation, the financial situation that they have there is they cut their middle school program. So what a sad situation where you have a K through 8 school, and some of the really difficult, that middle-aged kids that have a tough time in school, 7th and 8th graders, and they have to cut that program because of the financial situation. They also cut breakfast and lunch programs because it is optional and it's actually a losing proposal. Each kid that you serve lunch or breakfast to, well, I'll say lunch, the average loss is about $2 to $2.50 per kid per day. So when you're thinking about a charter school budget that's really tight and an area where it's quote unquote optional, some of the charter schools feel like that's the only way that they can survive is to not provide food. And last week, Saturday, they took to the streets to get some help, and they started doing things like selling musubi and shirts and stuff on the highway to see if they can raise operational funds. The bad news for all schools is that more and more charter schools are struggling with providing food programs and have decided or are considering cutting their food service program. And then, of course, studies show that lack of facilities funding, hurts educational outcomes. And as Wei did their presentation, and you looked, the difference of the kinds of environments that they do their testing in, and still they did well, but not all schools would be able to withstand, the students would be able to withstand the noises or whatever it is from the outdoors. So, facilities is extremely important. Okay, so some of these reports that went out, I just, step back and ask, are these reliable? No matter how you slice it, our recognition school did awesome. But we have, 6 of our charter schools in the focus area, 8 are in the priority area. When I did a median score for charters versus the DOE, we ended up with this. The median score is smaller, lesser than the DOE score. So are these types of analysis, reliable? And HPCSN would argue not yet. The challenge is when you have a changing system, and I'll outline it by saying, we had some data issues. The one-size-fits-all doesn't necessarily work. Some lack of training. Implementation was a struggle in some areas, and I'll also point out some unintended consequences. So you're familiar with some of these things. Adjustments were made. So like for ACT for 8th and 11th graders, you had, some of them didn't take it, and it was optional because when we were going through our transition year, some of the communication did not get to schools. So we lived that, we were a part of that kind of decision making that happened last year, and ACT became optional. So in that case, what happens is the points get redistributed. And yes, it's true that, it's done in a way that is supposed to not hurt them, but I would also argue that it doesn't help them either. Second year grad cohort rate instead of 3 years of grad rate being used. This was a HAAS, and I'm not sure if it applied to any of the other schools, issues like this, but the Hawaii HAAS, basically in ESEA, it states that you have 3 years before the trigger, is implemented for a school. And just because of the change in the calculation for graduation cohorts, the first of the 3 years was dropped, and so you could only use the 2 years. So there was a difference in the way that ESEA application said, we think this is reasonable, we're going to take 3 years, but in the case where the data did not necessarily work, they squished it into 2 years, but that didn't work for Haas. And in the case of WEA, where we have no free and reduced lunch numbers, before it wasn't a requirement that you have free and reduced numbers being reported. Now, I'll show you in another slide, it is being required, and therefore, I think in the future, we'll see those types of situations solved. And then there was other things that Doug talked about where there was incorrect enrollment data for grad rates. And when I say incorrect, I don't necessarily mean it's a blame on one or the other side. It could be just, it just happened. So in this case, there was some incorrect enrollment data for the graduation cohorts, and that's being fixed. So I'm going to say the second subject was one size is not fitting all. There are old issues under NCLB. The Hawaiian language test, that's a big issue. It's most likely over our heads, but it would be really helpful if some policy decisions were made at the upper level so that things like this could be very, clear, and the commission can do a fair job at, measuring our Hawaiian focus, not Hawaiian focus, but Hawaiian language schools. Another old issue is compromising charter schools' mission standards, curriculum, instruction assessments. I'm glad to see that, WEA was here because they have this, they talked about how maybe their mission doesn't necessarily align with how you prepare for, StriveHI or whatever. And schools will have to, if according to the contract, they will have to make those adjustments. Kona Pacific was another one where, the way that they teach all the way to 5th grade, which is considered age appropriate. But then when you look, and so those scores don't look that great, but then if you look at their ACT score later on in the middle school, that they're one of the highest, if not tied for the highest ACT scores across the state. Graduation rates, so this is long time issue still, is small graduation cohorts. That causes problems, and then many schools attract students who are behind or struggling in the Hawaii Department of Education. And then special programs. I do want to highlight this because Haas has this SPED work readiness program, and it's a pretty large program. If you visited their school, you would have seen it. But SPED this particular program is moderate to severe special ed students. And with that, it's really hard on their meeting their graduation rate, and I'll go into that a little bit more. And then of course, small schools take a pretty big beating a lot of times when you're looking at tests or systems that are there to measure large schools. So here's some of the issues, new issues that are created by StriveHI. Measuring K through 12 schools as high schools. These are all of our schools who are high schools. And this is the percentage of 9 through 12 students and the percentage of K through 8. So if you take a look at this, even if you take a look at the higher end, like Hakipu'u, WEA, and La'ahana, they're about 50 to 60% of their students are high school students, and they have others that belong to that school, but you're only assessed 50% of your score, which is 200 out of the 400 points. You're judging that based upon the high school. Now, if you take a look at some of these lower schools that have lower percentages, Ka'umeke, Kamaili, Kawaikini, they have about 10% or less, and 200 out of their 400 points is based upon their high school population.
Can I ask you a clarifying question?
Sure.
Not clarifying, I just want to know, is there any thought about this StriveHI disaggregating primary and secondary and reporting both? And then if the school is 50% one or 51% one, then that would be the more emphasized data set?
You know, I think if I recall I can't answer that question because that's more a DOE question. But what I can say is that as we continue conversations, that we will be looking to make those kinds of suggestions to the DOE. And I think, from what I understand, they're already aware of the problem, and they're looking for how they can make, you know, some changes and talk to the US DOE about their application and making changes. So that's a really positive
Even
thing.
if the schools were to get two
Scores,
scores,
yeah. Yeah, or yeah, you know, there are potentially some really good, you know, possibilities for improvement. The second one, growth scores may have been stunted due to schools' testing strategy. Now keep in mind that charter schools, you know, are different, their missions are different, and taking like high stakes testing is not like the thing that they embrace the most. So I'll use Innovations as an example. So what Innovations does is they basically say, okay, October, November is when we can take the test. We know that a lot of our schools our students are proficient already. Go ahead, take the test. 80% of you are going to be proficient on your first time around. Instead of testing them again, they go ahead and just leave them alone so that they can get to continuing their educational program and their mission. What this does, though, is it measures growth. So the likelihood that they would have learned more by the ending of the year is pretty likely because there's still like 5 months more left in the school year. So it's possible that, you know, some of these scores, because many of our schools test like that, they didn't take the second and the third option for many of their kids. So it could have stunted their growth. Graduation rate now accounts for 25% of the total score for a high school. Just the graduation rate is 25% of the total high school. That's equal to the ACT and the college going rate at the same, you know, in regards to points. So when you take a look at that for a school, yes, graduation might be a really sticking point, and I get that, but you're so discrediting like the college going rate and these other pretty impressive things, you know, like ACT scores. Triggers, you guys know about this, especially graduation rates are especially hard on certain schools. You might end up like Haas, where you're in a perfect storm. Non-participation rates automatically count as not proficient. So this was a really big issue for StriveHI, that to me it's a conflict in policies or even state law that is almost outside of the realm of where we operate today. And it's because if you have non-participation rates due to a parent opt-out option that is federally approved, that your parents can opt out, you know, and it's also federally approved that those who do opt out will automatically get not proficient or zero. You know, so it's kind of pretty harsh. Okay. So StriveHI was not necessarily designed with the implementation of charter schools in mind, but I have to say this very, very important note. The Hawaii Department of Education has done more to consider charter schools in public education policy than I have ever seen done before. And that's thanks to the leadership of Superintendent Mariyoshi and Chair Horner. Just the ability to work with Doug and the Commission, so I'll take this time to say thank you to the Commission and Doug, just for the partnerships and being able to work with, you know, HPCSN and schools. Definitely something that I'd like to highlight. So, what do I mean by that? The quick turnaround for the application. I mean, these application windows, implementation windows, HIDOE needing to show success and moving in the right direction does pose a real problem. Maybe not for just charter schools, probably, you know, all schools. And it's a little bit backwards in regards to embracing change that, you know, our unusual change models. When data did not work, policy calls were made that affected some charter schools negatively. We went past that, and that's Wea and Haas were two examples of that. You know, we went through this transition time for the commission, the schools, contracts, and everything like that. And there was a lot of communication, probably by email going up. But, you know, and I'll explain this in a later slides, but it's really hard. The communication for charters as independent public schools and making sure that that works really well is kind of difficult, but there was no real training or time to review reports. So schools couldn't answer whether or not, you know, oh, well, I don't have a free or reduced count, you know, and be able to take care of that before the results went public. So schools were unprepared for parents and public's questions. Schools still had unanswered, still today have unanswered questions, and answers do not yet exist, or key personnel have not yet been informed of the answer. Again, this is not to the, and one of our schools who said this, they basically said, you know, it's not the fault of the people that they talk to, whether it be Doug or Lindsay or, you know, whatever. It's not that, but it's the rush of needing to get this done. So there's like pukas, you know, around. And so as those things come about, the pukas will be filled, and hopefully the system, you know, gets better. And I think that's why we named this the, you know, artifacts of a changing system. The one thing that we also observed was graduation gap was not a part of the indicators. So you have all of these indicators that give you points to say, yes, you're doing good. No, you're not doing so good on this. But the triggers are usually a way to kind of say one of those things are really important and we're going to trigger you down into getting help, basically. Well, the graduation gap doesn't exist in the indicators. So we thought that that wasn't quite aligned. So should more be done to consider how charter schools are affected in these statewide issues? I would argue yes. We are as big or bigger than 7 of the 15 complex areas. This is incorrect. School year 2012 was the number. So down here, the source is from the enrollment count. So we broke that down, and we have percentages of all the students that are enrolled in all the different complexes. And charters do hold a significant piece of the pie. And so, you know, we'd like to work even closer than we have to really consider how charters and the implementation of these statewide types of measurements or systems affect charter schools. Some of the potential unintended consequences. Charter schools are faced with a no-win choice if they want to have high school programs that target students that are left behind or that are behind. They may contemplate eliminating high school if eventually it means closure. Classifications carry heavier consequences for charter schools. Whether reports are correct or incorrect, charter schools' reputations affect enrollment, ability to raise non-state funding, securing facilities and community partnerships. And it's a heavy consequence. Brighter future. So the issue, laws, StriveHI contracts are clear about charters aligning to the Common Core. Good, if charters align to the Common Core, results should improve over time. Common Core is supposed to be more performance task-based and less content-based, so that's kind of on the good side. Not so good, could be in direct conflict with the purpose and mission of the charter. Some charters will decide to compromise their educational programs in order to improve scores. And that's, you know, what Kona Pacific and other schools are doing. UH Lab, because maybe, you know, the way that they cover material is different in the way that they set up their program. Minimum data reporting requirements. MDRRs could eventually eliminate data issues and make data management easier for schools. I want to thank the Hawaii DOE department that handles this, because they've really done a great job with partnering with us. We'll take the not so good. We'll take up resources that schools do not have to make the needed changes. And then also, ESIS schools, the folks who use the ESIS system, do not own their data. So if they wanted to go back and really crunch their numbers, or, you know, go back and use data to inform, they would have to go to the DOE to get it. And charters really have a hard time with that. They like to have it there, at their use whenever they want. Implementation problems with StriveHI. Hawaii DOE is aware of some of the issues and are looking into making changes. Spoke with Hawaii DOE leadership this past week, and they want to help address these issues. Not so good. What will these solutions be? Will they get done? StriveHI has a big influence on the academic framework of the contract. How will schools be judged? Attitude towards StriveHI. The good. Some schools feel StriveHI is better than NCLB and or embrace data as areas for improvement. Although some do not believe high-stakes testing is the answer, schools are adjusting. Not so good. Some schools voice their disappointment with the graduation triggers, incorrect data, and K-12 assessed as high schools. Some are very disappointed with losing autonomy with either NCLB or StriveHI. So our conclusion is we urge the Commission to look further and deeper into StriveHI indicators and schools to better understand school achievements and success. We urge the Commission to use StriveHI and non-StriveHI indicators to determine the term of the next contract. StriveHI scores and classifications may not accurately reflect a school's status compared to other schools. Weights and school-specific measures are important factors for Commission consideration and actions for school contracts. Charter schools have much tougher consequences when assessments do not fit. Closure is the hammer, and there is no budget safety net such as the HIDOE. Many, if not all, charters are in desperate need of additional funding to stay open and more especially to meet the, well actually not more especially, and meet the expectations that are upon them. That's it. Mahalo and thank you for your time.